In 2014, after years of steady decline in viewership, especially after being taken out of the DirecTV lineup in 2010, G4 TV, the cable network that was, at one point, totally dedicated to geek media, had closed down. However, on July 24, 2020, a revival was announced through the official Twitter accounts for G4 TV, XPlay, and Attack of the Show, making a very simple statement: we never stopped playing, coupled with a 1-minute-long teaser video revealing a 2021 launch date. So G4 is returning, but in what capacity? Sadly, there's a distinct lack of information available to us at the moment, but that won't stop people from speculating, including me. Is the beloved G4 TV we knew back around 2004 to 2005 going to make a comeback? Or is this something that will ultimately end up being disappointing? What should we expect from this sudden revival? What shows will return and what format will it use? And what the hell even led to its awful final years before closure to begin with? Let's talk about it. For the benefit of those who don't know a lot, or anything at all, about G4, let's rewind the clock and talk a little bit about its history, from my own personal perspective as someone who used to be a passionate viewer. If you want a more in-depth look at the channel's entire lifespan, especially its origins, check out Good Bad Flix' video about the network. Anyway, back in 2004, when I was in 6th grade, I discovered a little channel called TechTV, a network dedicated entirely to technology and the internet. It featured original programming such as Call for Help, The Screensavers, and my personal favorite show of its lineup, XPlay. Until that point in time, I never knew a fully fledged TV show about reviewing games even existed. Needless to say, I became enamored with it extremely quickly, and basically lived vicariously through the hosts Adam Sessler and Morgan Webb as they either ranted or raved about games I likely would never play. Not so long after I discovered this network, in the very same year in fact, they announced a merger with G4, another Comcast-owned channel that debuted only 2 years prior and was thus still in its infancy. And this merger was preceded by a big marketing campaign that let TechTV viewers know that the upcoming network created as a result of this merger was going to be more gaming-focused than ever. As you can imagine, 12-year-old me was extremely excited about this, and my expectations were not only met, but exceeded. For a while, the channel was practically the only one I watched, at least outside of my blocks of Toonami and Saturday morning cartoons. Once the merger was complete and the new channel was called G4 TechTV, at least for several months before dropping the TechTV part, I was given more video game media than I could even keep up with at the time. There was Arena, which was a competitive show featuring multiplayer games that teams would play in a tournament format. Cheat, a program that obviously revealed cheats and secrets and discussed strategies for popular games. Cinematech, a show that played video game cutscenes and trailers one after another for a straight half hour. Icons, a cool and educational documentary series about companies, games, and people in the industry. Portal, a neat show that utilized gameplay in popular MMOs to create segments and skits. And Judgment Day, known outside of the US as Reviews on the Run, another game review show hosted by Victor Lucas and Tommy Tallarico. Basically, as a kid who was obsessed with video games, I was completely and utterly spoiled for choice. I could switch my DirecTV receiver to G4 TechTV at almost any time during the day and be greeted by a show I wanted to watch. It was amazing. Eventually, new shows started to air as well, the most popular of which being Attack of the Show, which would end up being one of the network's staple programs for years to come, with Kevin Pereira and Olivia Munn becoming two of the network's most recognizable faces. There was also Code Monkeys, an original animated comedy show about game developers using a neat 8-bit art style. However, things weren't so idyllic for long. Slowly but surely, other original programs were beginning to disappear. Within the first 3 years after the merger, several key shows were axed, including Arena, Filter, The Screensavers, Judgment Day, Portal, Pulse, Call for Help, Game Makers, and Icons. Basically half of the channel's original programming, a massive portion of what gave it its unique identity, was gone. Why? How? What led to this? Well, long story short, back in 2005, the president of the channel, Charles Hirschhorn, was replaced by Neil Tiles, who came from a sports programming background, specifically Fox Sports and ESPN. After settling into his new position, he had the goal in mind to turn G4 into more of a general, male-oriented network, turning it away from so much gaming content. In an interview with Variety in 2006, Tiles stated, "We're going through a change. Guys like to play games, but not necessarily watch a bunch of shows with games on the screen. So what we're doing now is expanding G4 from a network solely defined by video games to one inspired by them." But the bad news doesn't stop there. Once more in 2006, Comcast consolidated G4 into a new group of networks alongside E! And Style, which would be headed by Ted Harbert, who was formerly a president of E!, with the goal of further expanding its range of entertainment. If you were there to witness the slow, painful death of the network like I was, then you don't need me to tell you that this was ultimately a bad idea. This new, generalized, and downright gentrified era of G4 had begun, and its soul, the thing that made it interesting and different to begin with, was being stripped away. I was still a kid at the time, but even I noticed that it was losing its identity, which is something they eventually realized themselves and tried to somewhat reverse in 2008 by creating a programming block called G4 Rewind, which aired old episodes of some of the Axed shows that I listed. But it was too little too late by then and basically just came off as puppeting a corpse. By the time I graduated high school in 2010, the amount of time I spent watching G4 almost disappeared entirely, which is something that 12-year-old me would not have expected. XPlay and Attack of the Show were essentially the only shows left that bared any resemblance to the network's old content, but they weren't nearly enough to keep me interested. I had essentially turned to the internet to provide me with the gaming media I wanted. Finally, the killing blow landed later that same year, with DirecTV announcing G4's removal from their channel lineup. Sadly, it was not a quick death. It was a slow and agonizing one. In the final months leading up to its shuttering, G4 TV had developed a, frankly, pathetic reputation for essentially being a dried-up husk propped up by syndicated programming. Weekend at Bernie style, but in this case, Bernie was already a skeleton. XPlay and Attack of the Show were long gone by now, unable to save themselves from the continued cutting of original shows to be replaced by reruns of Cheaters, Cops, Heroes, and Lost. Eventually, syndication rights to even those shows ran out, and G4 just fell back to reruns of its original stuff until it finally closed in November 2014. Much to the sadness of my inner 12-year-old, G4 did not go out with a bang, but with a whimper. I spent a lot of years being pretty bitter over how poorly run G4 was. Since its closure, it had been used as an emblematic example of how network decay can ruin a channel. By continuously forcing G4 to expand its horizons and abandon more of its original content in favor of appealing to a mass audience with a sloppy collection of syndicated programs, longtime viewers were left alienated, and the nicheness that drew them to the network to begin with was gone. The magic they were attracted to back when it was all about video games 24/7 was nowhere to be found anymore. But maybe this fate was ultimately unavoidable. Maybe G4 was destined to be replaced by similar content that was available for free on the internet. After all, that's where I started to go when I wasn't getting what I wanted from the network. But that leads us to our next topic, the glimmer of hope that has recently shown on Twitter, the announcement of G4's return. The key question that needs to be answered is, what should we expect from this relaunching? Well, considering the fact that the official accounts for XPlay and Attack of the Show were used in this announcement, it's safe to assume both of these shows may return in some capacity, which is smart because those were the network's two biggest flagship programs. I couldn't tell you if the original hosts were returning too, but some of them seem pretty excited, particularly Olivia Munn and Kevin Pereira. Morgan Webb retweeted the announcement with a humorous comment, but we shouldn't take it as confirmation of anything just yet. Generally speaking, the response to the reveal has been very positive. The announcement tweet on the G4 TV account has garnered over 50,000 likes and around 20,000 retweets, and other people in the entertainment business are seeking involvement with the network, such as Austin Creed, aka Xavier Woods, of WWE fame. Another big thing people are wondering is, will this be a television network again? To be honest, I highly doubt it. Being at the mercy of a major cable or satellite television provider was what caused its greatest downfall to begin with. Assuming this revival isn't already set to be exclusive to NBC's streaming service Peacock, which it very well may be, the next safest bet for a G4 comeback in 2021 would likely be a YouTube and/or a Twitch channel. Pre-recorded content could premiere on YouTube directly, while live content streams simultaneously on both platforms. The issue with this would be needing to adhere to another corporation's rules and guidelines, which may or may not be friendly with all the content they wish to produce. It could also probably bottleneck the amount of money that goes straight to Comcast. There's also the theory that it isn't a real network relaunch at all, and is actually just the launch of an archive of old shows. Frankly, I don't buy that because I don't think this much noise and hype would be made over such a thing, but honestly, I wouldn't even be mad at that really. The announcement of G4's return was followed up on Friday, July 31st by the first official Q&A that was held on the G4 TV subreddit, where questions would be answered by Blair Herter, producer and occasional host on the old G4 and current VP of Content Partnerships and Brand Development on the new G4. The good news about this Q&A is that Blair responded to a lot of questions. The bad news is that very few of those responses had consequential information that could be easily parsed. Basically, no big additional announcements came out of this thread, but there were some interesting tidbits worth touching on. Just so you know, as of recording my narration of this video, Blair still seems to be giving answers, so this Q&A is a bit of an ongoing thing. I'll leave a link to it in the description so you can read everything in your own time. First, Blair acknowledges having access to archives of G4's old shows, but says they're currently inaccessible due to the pandemic, which probably goes hand in hand with another answer where he says you can expect both old and new things from this new G4. In relation to that, he expresses confidence in having content that will also attract people who don't have any nostalgia for the old G4. When asked about Anime Unleashed, he says anime will always have a place on G4, which likely isn't a confirmation that anime is currently set to appear, but the door may be open for it to happen. He also reassured that G4 staff will return to visiting conventions just as before. He also left a pinch of hope about job openings and a potential way to allow people to audition for participation in shows. Again, no confirmation, but the possibility is there. Sadly, no specific shows were name-dropped by Blair in a direct answer regarding which programs would be coming back, which leads up to the next question: after Attack of the Show and XPlay, what other old shows have a shot at returning? Honestly, that's not an easy question to answer. Once again, a few shows could be made redundant thanks to the existence of YouTube. Cinematheque in particular, as popular as it was, unfortunately might not have a real place as its own show anymore, since it's just a collection of trailers and in-game cutscenes you could watch individually whenever you wanted, but I suppose it could fulfill a certain niche. However, there are some shows that could thrive immensely. Arena could be primed for a comeback because there isn't even a slight shortage of competitive games to play. From MOBAs, to battle royales, to first-person shooters, to fighting games, to sports and racing, there's a massive library of multiplayer titles that Arena could prosper on, both AAA and indie. And it doesn't have to be limited to teams of random people. In this age of esports, they could also host exhibitions between established players and teams for pretty much any game. It could be cool. Then there's icons. If there's one type of content that consistently gets big views on the internet, it's well-researched and investing documentaries. And video game documentaries are no different. There are already several YouTube channels that thrive on this exact content, such as NoClip and Ahoy. But with a big enough staff, G4 could push out a wide variety of content much faster, and at a similar level of quality. Running on a similar concept would be Game Makers, the show about going behind the scenes to look at the process of game development. In addition to AAA dev companies, the industry's independent sector is prospering, with studios coming in at every shape and size, from 50-man companies that are days away from crossing over to blockbuster territory, to literal one-man teams where a single individual is doing all the work. You can make a new episode for a different company every week without a break, and never run out of devs to follow. There's also Code Monkeys, because why not have an animated comedy about video games on a network dedicated to them? Entering slightly more risky territory, with good writers, Portal could make a return as well. I know that making a skit show using MMO gameplay would probably have a pretty niche demographic, but there's no shortage of current-day MMOs to utilize, and it doesn't have to be limited to RPGs. You can throw in live service games like Destiny, Warframe, and The Division, and hell, even Monster Hunter World if you feel so inclined. Cheat was one of the last staple pieces of original programming before G4 went south, but unfortunately its place as its own show may be questionable too. Any type of cheat or strategy that's worth trying in any game is basically made public with its own video by someone else as soon as possible. But, similar to Cinematech, it could fulfill a niche for people who watch a show like this just for the sake of it, even if they don't play the games featured on the episode they're watching. To sum it all up, there are original G4 shows that could still prosper if brought back in 2021, and some that could be pointless. But if new management knows which shows to bet on in this relaunched G4, then it could see a lot of success. Of course, there's also the chance that this relaunch could crash and burn, but as someone who has always lamented the poor decision making that led to the demise of the first iteration of the network, I would like to be cautiously optimistic. I don't expect every personality and host to return, especially those who are already busy with their current careers, but support and appearances from old faces could help a lot. It's my hope that we get the content and character of 2004 G4 simply updated to meet the standards of current-day gaming-related programming. It would be great not only for old viewers to get their favorite network back, but for a new generation of players to experience what we loved about the G4 all those years ago. I'm crossing my fingers and eagerly looking forward to new details. This concludes my video on G4's demise and return. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. If you're interested in more gaming-related content, please consider subscribing. I talk about gaming news, do occasional reviews, and discussion videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.